All right, joining me now is Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who has done so much research on all of these related issues, along with his colleague, Senator Chuck Grassley. Senator Johnson, what do you think about this Ozark judge story? I think she may be smarter than some of the slicksters up north. She's going to be asking all the right questions.
Well, Larry, I can certainly understand why Ms. Roberts, her attorneys, and the judge in the case don't believe a word that Hunter Biden has told them. They need to see this documentation. And by the way, I mean, wouldn't it just be basic table stakes if you're in a paternity suit that you should have to turn over all of your financial information so that the mother of your child would have access to that to determine what a proper support payment would be? But in Hunter Biden's world, he's above the law. Remember, we've got a multi-tier system of justice here. He never really believes that he's got to be held to the same standards as like a normal person would be. And what's very interesting, Senator Grassley and my reports, those were based on Treasury reports coming up through 2019, right? Now I have James Comer and members of the House are getting additional Treasury records. The Bidens knew they were under investigation 2019, 2020, and yet they continued their grifts. They continued to sell their influence, peddling the family name. They're just brazen. They're so confident that their co-conspirators in the deep state and in the media will continue to cover for them. It's been, by and large, that's been the reality.
Well, we've got a list of the charges against Hunter Biden, or what we know to be the charges in Delaware: 2 misdemeanor counts for failing to file taxes, felony count for tax evasion, a felony count for lying on a federal form to purchase a firearm. As a number of people have suggested, this stuff is so ordinary, it should have been done in 5 days, not 5 years. But the beat goes on. What's ironic to me, or what's particularly interesting to me, is that this judge in Arkansas, north of Little Rock, deep in the Ozarks, for heaven's sake, this judge may discover what everyone else has been looking for the last 5 years. That is a possibility. She got Hunter in court, and they're going to be asking tough questions for him.
I hope they uncover it. We have whistleblowers saying that Attorney Weiss doesn't have the resources to conduct a proper investigation. I'm concerned that Attorney General Garland is slow-walking this, possibly allowing the statute of limitations to run its course so they can't charge him with more serious crimes. Remember, Eric Schwerin, a close confidant of Vice President Biden and a business associate of Hunter, warned in an email Hunter Biden that he had not reported $400,000 of Burisma income back in 2014. He warned him in 2017. Hunter Biden did not make his tax payments till October 2021, 5 years later. And that's that Kevin Morse, that West Coast attorney, apparently gave him a loan. Then they announced that Hunter Biden had sold his 10% stake in that BHR Partners. And now we've come to find out that Kevin Morse is the one that is the managing partner of the company that held that 10% stake. So again, there's a lot of layers of this onion that still need to be peeled back, a lot of skin that needs to be revealed. We still don't know the truth. Hopefully this judge in Arkansas can come up with some more truths.
Well, it would be great, right? In smack in the middle of the Ozarks, talk about middle America. Senator Johnson, you have become very critical of current Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who in many ways, and there's a lot of stuff out now, he quarterbacked this letter. I call it the Gang of 51, the senior intelligence officers or former officers. He concocted a lie. He knew it was a lie. He knew that Hunter Biden's laptop was real. He knew it wasn't a Russian disinformation. He knew a lot of very difficult stuff was in this laptop computer. What's he doing still being Secretary of State? And interesting, John Ratcliffe, former director of national intelligence in the Trump administration, has just called for Blinken's resignation or worse, for his impeachment. What do you make of that?
Well, what he's doing is he continuing to cover up for his boss, the President of the United States. And listen, this fraud was massive. It was egregious. He should resign or he should be impeached. But now we know that he lied to Congress as well. Remember, he was Deputy Secretary of State under Obama. We certainly had interested in interviewing him during our investigation. He canceled that meeting before the election, but because he wanted to be Secretary of State, he did agree to sit down for a transcribed interview in December of 2020, and he lied to us. We asked him point blank, did you communicate with Hunter Biden via text or email? And he said no. Well, now we have emails between Hunter Biden and Antony Blinken, plus his wife. Her name is Evan Ryan. Didn't make that connection. She also worked in the State Department. She was basically acting as a conduit, using her personal email between Hunter Biden and Antony Blinken, in one case, trying to set up a phone call between Blue Star Strategies. This is the lobbying forum for Burisma and Antony Blinken. So again, we're just starting to peel back more and more layers, but it certainly shows that Antony Blinken, you can't trust a word that comes out of his mouth. He lied to Congress. He set up that massive fraud. He should resign immediately, or he should be impeached.
Senator Johnson, when Mr. Blinken sat down with you, quote unquote, was he under oath?
Yes.
He was under oath.
He was made aware of the fact that lying to Congress is a crime, and he said he had no reason to lie. He had no reason not to be truthful. He was not truthful. He did lie, which calls into question all of his testimony, where he denied talking to Hunter Biden or having any knowledge about his workings with Burisma. So we need to follow up with Antony Blinken to find out what he really knows. And we need all of his records and his wife's records as well.
At that point, Senator Johnson, just one more, please. Did you ask him about putting the phony, fraudulent letter from what I call the Gang of 51, the former intelligence officers who were trying to help? Did he talk about that, or let me ask that. First of all, did he mention anything about that?
No, we had no idea to connect him to that whatsoever. That came out through the House investigation in their interview with Deputy CIA Director Mike Morrell, or former Deputy Director. So that's just been revealed in the last few weeks.
So Blinken should be called before Congress under oath to ask about this fraudulent letter, because he knew it was a fraud from day one.
All of his records, his emails, his texts, as well as his wife's from back under the Obama administration and during the campaign, need to be subpoenaed and need to be made public. The American public deserves the truth, and they're not getting it yet.
Yes, sir. All right, Senator Ron Johnson, thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your time. All right.
Have a good night.